So let's talk about Novak Djokovic. He's arguably the greatest tennis player of all time, and probably the greatest era of tennis of all time. Himself, Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal are all fighting it out to see who can accumulate the most Grand Slams before they all retire. They're all, of course, chasing that title of being the objective GOATs. Before the pandemic started, Djokovic was number one in the ATP World Rankings. The last Grand Slam he won, if I recall, was Wimbledon in 2021. To my knowledge, there has been no top-down imposition of mandatory vaccine mandates from the tennis authorities. I did some research on this and couldn't find anything that suggested that. It's left entirely at the hosting country's discretion to manage how they contain the virus, the competitors, of course. And as so many of us know, Australia has been pretty fascist with its handling of the pandemic, shown by the fact that they've effectively introduced COVID concentration camps, one of which Novak Djokovic sort of ended up in a hotel when trying to compete in the Australian Open.
Yes, I'm aware of those COVID camps that they opened, that they constructed. I forget the name of one of them in particular, but there was a very notable effort by the authorities to try and sort of doll it up for everybody by having lots of influencers posting pictures of themselves in bikinis and other such things to say like, oh, look at how much of a good time I'm having here, until videos leaked of people trying to just get off the front porch of the tiny little caravans that they'd been set up in and being told by people in full hazmat suits.
And the stuff that they have to endure is even worse than that, as I'll go into.
So what you were saying that the tennis league itself hasn't got any strict vaccine mandates, but it's more an issue with Australia.
Yes, okay. As in this is an issue that the Australian government had. I don't think the ATP or whoever the tennis board is in this case actually had anything to do with why he was deported. I know for a fact that in Formula One they're now discussing mandatory vaccinations at the sports institutional level. I don't think this discussion has come to a conclusion in tennis yet, to my knowledge. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But in short, on arrival, his visa was rejected by border control. This is Novak Djokovic, and he was sent shortly after to a quarantine hotel like the one I just mentioned to wait and see if he'd be allowed to participate. The decision for him to be quarantined was originally revoked after he appealed, but then the Australian government cancelled his visa anyway to ensure that they could deport him. This, of course, made headline news, and waves of people came out in support of Djokovic, and many others came out in contempt of his decision to advocate for bodily autonomy. But anyway, he's continued to hold the line, and in a recent interview with the BBC went as far as saying he would actually be willing to miss tournaments should it come to it. So the BBC reads, in a wide-ranging interview, his first since he was detained in Melbourne in January, Djokovic addressed speculation about the timing of his positive COVID case in December and discussed his own attitude towards the vaccine. Djokovic said he hoped vaccination requirements in certain tournaments would change, adding he was hoping he can play for many more years, but he also confirmed he was willing to forego the chance to become statistically the greatest male tennis player of all time because he felt so strongly. Djokovic's rival Rafa Nadal has won 21 Grand Slam singles titles, the most out of any male competitor. When asked why, Djokovic replied, because the principles of decision-making on my body are more important than any title or anything else. I'm trying to be in tune with my body as much as I possibly can. Djokovic said he had always been a great student of wellness, well-being, health, nutrition, and his decision had been partly influenced by the positive impact factors such as changing his diet and his sleeping patterns had on his abilities as an athlete. He said he was keeping his mind open about the possibility of being vaccinated in the future because we're all trying to find collectively a best solution to end COVID, as he said. And I was never against vaccination, he continues to say. I understand that globally everyone is trying to put a big effort into handling this virus and seeing hopefully an end to this virus, he said. So there we are in effect. He's not even an actual anti-vaxxer. But he was still awfully treated.
He does bring up some great points there, which is that we're taking advice on general health because there is a separation that you could make between medical care, which is generally speaking what hospitals and doctors trade in, and healthcare, which is something that realistically speaking, barring advice that you can get from people, is kind of specific to you. And that's one thing that we've not really seen from most global institutions throughout the pandemic, is an advocating of healthcare, saying you should be losing weight, you should be exercising, you should be trying to eat more healthy. This is what people like Joe Rogan have been advocating the whole time, and the governments decided, let's shut down the gyms, let's stop people going out, eat out to help out.
Making people in turn more unhealthy, all in virtue trying to stop people from dying from someone that, isn't really killing anyone
and
other
in
than
doing
those.
so, making themselves more at risk from the virus.
I mean, the bodily autonomy argument, of course, stands up on its own, but there's a professional reason for Djokovic to do this, because in his early years, he did actually suffer from some, I don't know, energy deficits or something like that. I'm not an expert in sports science, so I don't know what this. He had a particular condition related to lactose intolerance. As soon as he changed his diet to a lactose intolerance, one that accommodated for his lactose intolerance, or was it gluten? I think it might have been gluten.
Either way.
Allergic to gluten, I think. It completely transformed how he performed on the court, and within years he was beating Federer and Nadal consistently, and I think became the world number one. But in 2011, went on to win Wimbledon several times since then, and is now arguably, I would say, probably on balance the best player, and probably if this. If he's not actually ostracised from tennis by the countries not letting him participate, he probably would eclipse Nadal, if I were to speculate. But
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, that's just my speculation. But anyway, he said he initially could not get in touch with anyone in his family in this hotel, but was later allowed to access his phone when he was inside the detention centre. But it gets a lot worse if we get the Daily Mail article up here. As I said, he has special dietary requirements, and apparently he was served up food in the hotel that had maggots in it, which led to widespread criticism of the way he and, well, of course, people made this a broader case about refugees, about how they were being treated in there. And, well, shall we have a look at the Daily Mirror's framing of this? Making him look like a complete prima donna rather than someone who's actually concerned for his professional career.
Yeah, one of the things on that Daily Mail article as well was that it said apparently there've been protests and fires there, and COVID outbreaks and rotten food being served to the people around. And remember, this is all for your health and well-being, of course. Jesus.
Yeah. But Novak Djokovic demanded a personal chef and access to tennis courts and a quarantine hotel, not least because he's a professional tennis player. But during their address to the media, the article reads, the Serbian's mother, Diana, slammed the condition of her son's hotel, describing him as basically a prisoner. I spoke with him for a couple of hours ago. She said he was good. He didn't speak a lot, but we spoke for a few minutes. He couldn't sleep. And as a mother, what can I say? You just imagine how I feel. I feel terrible. I mean, he was basically going through what you could say is hell, really.
I mean, yeah,
along with everyone else in there.
It does honestly sound like imprisonment, really, doesn't it? Just for his decision to not be vaccinated.
That's what she said. They're keeping him in like a prisoner. It's just not fair. It's not human. His accommodation is absolutely appalling, as you can see over there. I mean, it's not. I've endured worse than that, but even so, if you consider that, with having, I don't know, maggots in your food.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that doesn't look too bad until you realise it's also spreading COVID, which you would assume, if they're all unvaccinated people, that the Australian government would see that as amongst the most vulnerable people to get COVID, and with rotten food as well. Other than that, it doesn't look too different from my uni horse, to be honest.
Come to think of it, you are absolutely right, and he's probably...
But it's still the fact that you are put in there without being asked, without any choice of where else to go, and then you are kept in there by force.
But anyway, having had his visa revoked, he appealed the decision, which was then brought back so he could stay. But then they decided, the Australian government that is, to deport the world number one by revoking the decision, because he was, as they saw it, a symbol for the far right, pretty much. And this is what the article of The Sun reports here. Immigration Minister Alex Hawke used his powers to cancel Djokovic's visa on health and good order grounds and overturn an earlier successful appeal. He argued the star's presence in Australia could trigger rallies and civil unrest, and also encourage its citizens not to get vaccinated against COVID. Hawke said that he accepted Djokovic's recent COVID infection meant he was a highly negligible risk to those around him, but he was perceived by some as a talisman of a community of anti-vaccine sentiment. He said, I consider that Mr. Djokovic's ongoing presence in Australia may lead to an increase in anti-vaccination sentiments generated in the Australian community, potentially leading to an increase in civil unrest of the kind previously experienced in Australia, with rallies and protests which may themselves be a source of community transmission. The minister noted in the court documents Djokovic was a person of influence and status.
Is that his new identity. I identify as a person of influence. But they sound like they're treating Djokovic himself like a disease.
Yeah, they are.
The mere presence of Djokovic in our sphere might cause others to become infected with anti-vaccine sentiment, even though he's never said anything.
Yeah, and of course the disease they have in mind is probably not first and foremost COVID, the one that they're actually allegedly trying to quash. It's the fact that he's an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah, it's
That's
the
where the dirt
disease
lies.
of wrong thing.
Yes,
that's what they're on about.
Precisely. So that was their reasoning for doing this to him in the first place. But anyway, if we come back to the present day, Gillian McKeith, the presenter of You Are What You Eat, expressed her support for Novak Djokovic. Good for her. I haven't heard of her in years.
Yeah, me
the
neither.
greatest tennis player of all time is not willing to be coerced into taking that jab and will not take it in order to enter the French Open or Wimbledon if they require it. I really don't think it will get to that in the case of Wimbledon, but I wouldn't put it past Macron to prevent him from going to the French Open. So yeah, if we move on to the next, we can see Sir Richard Taylor's support for Djokovic too. And there's a video which we'll play in a minute. It says principles over career. That's what I call a real man. Well said. But shall we have a look at this this snippet of the interview that we discussed earlier?
Yeah. Do you want to just click on that, John, and we can just watch it that way?
Tournaments at the moment,
and that's the price you're willing to pay.
That is the price that I'm willing to pay.
Ultimately, are you prepared to forego the chance to be the greatest player that ever picked up a racket, statistically, because you feel so strongly about this jab?
Yes. I do.
But as things stand, if this means that you miss the French Open, is that a price you'd be willing to pay?
Yes, that is the price that I'm willing to pay.
And if it means that you miss Wimbledon this year, again, that's a price you're willing to pay?
Yes. Also the tournaments at the moment.
Okay.
And that's the price you're willing to pay?
Bodily autonomy and freedom is more important than any amount of trophies he could win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that honestly inspires a lot of respect in me. And I think it's very important for people with the kind of influence that Djokovic has to be the ones to stand up and take a stance against this, because as silly as it sounds, and as much as I'm going to start putting that on my business cards, he is genuinely a person of great influence across the world. Yeah. I'm not a tennis player, I'm not a tennis fan, not even a sports fan, but I'd heard of Novak Djokovic.
Yeah, but just to hammer this home, I mean, Nadal has got 21 Grand Slams. Djokovic has got 20. So he's honestly that close. As in he could
he could overtake it.
He could.
Wanted, I mean,
if he subverted his decision and got the vaccine, he could quite easily overtake Rafael Nadal. But the fact that he's at that freedom in the broadest sense actually means more to him than being regarded as the best tennis player potentially ever. That says a lot.
Well, we've in the sphere of public influence for a very, very long time, I would say we've had an absolute vacuum of people with principles and integrity. So this is a very good thing to me. Everyone's got to find somewhere to stand their own hill to die on, and I respect him for choosing this one.
The sad thing is, though, to my knowledge, he is the only professional tennis player, or at least of this magnitude, who has actually made this stance. And he hasn't had a lot of support from his fellow tennis players, such as Rafa Nadal that I mentioned. That
doesn't surprise me.
No, so if we go on to the article on Rafa Nadal, The Guardian, yes, there is, here we are. Yeah, so he basically, Nadal pretty much stated that Djokovic's prohibition from participating in the tournament is his own fault for caring so much about his political principles. So Nadal reiterated that the clearest way to ensure participation in Melbourne was through embracing vaccination, and that Djokovic had known the conditions for many months. Well, that's not entirely true, because this was a pretty off-the-cuff reaction from Australia, really. They didn't give him months of notice that they were going to treat the tennis players like this should they decide to perhaps not go the way that they thought.
Honestly, this I'm not saying anything about the quality or the effects of the vaccination, but this kind of deification of the idea of just the vaccination in general, well, you should just submit to it, really comes across to me with the same sort of attitude as, well, you can't get on the spaceship if you don't drink the Kool-Aid. That's how it comes across to me.
Yeah, very much so. But Nadal says, the only thing I can say is that I believe in what the people who know about medicine say, and if people say that we need to get vaccinated, we need to get the vaccine. That's my point of view, says Nadal. So he basically hasn't really been in touch with any or engaged with any news source other than
the mainstream. I mean, have the tennis balls been? Has he been using his head as the racket?
Or has he even been looking at the statistics, like the UK's COVID statistics, for example, and actually identified the complete overreaction particularly over the Omicron variant.
All you need to do is look at the spectators' graphs of predictions versus reality.
It doesn't take very much, but he goes on to say, I think if he wanted, he would be playing here in Australia without a problem. He made his own decisions and everybody is free to take their own decisions. But then there are some consequences. Of course, I don't like the situation that is happening. In some way, I feel sorry for him, but at the same time, he knew the conditions since a lot of months ago, that he makes his own decision. And I'm sorry, but no. He hasn't known this is going to be the case for months. The Australian government basically just freaked out off the cuff, pretty much. Didn't know what to do. Wanted to make an example of him, and they did that. And now they're being seen for what they are.
Oh, we don't want a pandemic of independent thinkers. Oh no.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he has unsporting intention here, Rafael Nadal, but Novak is probably the tennis player most likely to beat his record. So do you not think that maybe he's silently quite glad?
There might just be a little bit of motivated interest going into here. Oh, thank God, my greatest competition's out of the running. Oh, sweet. I mean, he knew the consequences, you know.
Yeah, but I suppose if he was that way inclined, he would have said, like, you know what, Roger, why don't you do the same thing? And make us, then again, Roger Federer had already had the vaccine, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, given that...
I mean, whether you're vaccinated or not, you can at least stand by integrity and respect the choices of the people who should be your contemporaries, you know?
Yeah. But if we get up the Daily Mirror's angle of this, again, it's pretty much, if we scroll down, we can see it's anti-vaxxer Novak Djokovic would rather miss more tennis than take COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah.
Yes.
Good. He's got his principles right. And as you can probably guess, the journalists at The Guardian haven't been all that supportive or sympathetic with Djokovic's position either, which he explained in the interview with the BBC. So if we get up The Guardian's... no, never mind. It's but the Guardian basically... I forgot to include that link. That's my fault there. But I'll just read out what was said. Here he is again, his own worst enemy, as Djokovic attempts to navigate the world while unvaccinated. While he... Literally, that is a direct quote from The Guardian.
That sounds like a threat. If you don't do what we say, we're going to make life hard for you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're saying, and that's what they're doing, but...
Yeah. And while his biggest rival, Rafael Nadal, took advantage of his absence to win a historic 21st Grand Slam title at the Australian Open, according to the ATP, 99% of the top 100 is now vaccinated. God, that's disappointing. He stands alone. Kudos to him. As the only tennis player to have a spine.
Yeah, once again, I mean, I wasn't really that aware of him.
Yeah.
I'd heard his name, but honestly, all of this is making me respect him as a man of integrity. I don't know if there's other stuff like maybe skeletons in the closet that I'm not aware of, then whatever.
Yeah.
But for this, seems like a good guy.
I know. Yeah. But anyway, she ends. The reality for Djokovic now is no different from the 2 excellent weeks of tennis in Australia following his deportation. To stop sports for nobody, and the other 99 players in the top 100 will continue to compete around the world. As long as Djokovic treads this path and vaccination restrictions remain, he will have to face the consequences of his decisions by being a better, I would say, advocate of human freedom than all of the other 99s. Again, win for Novak Djokovic. But just to summarise, look, I'm a lifelong Roger Federer fanboy. I've always kind of hated Djokovic, given the nature of the rivalry and the fact that he just keeps stealing Roger's titles. But
are you a tennis hooligan?
Yes, I am a little bit. He's won me over with his stance on this, and I really hope that he continues to hold the line, as I'm sure he will. Some things are more important than sport, and the right to decide whether you want to be stabbed with an alien substance or not is definitely one of them. So hopefully it won't get to the point where he can't participate in the French. But at least we can be sure, fingers crossed, that he'll be back at Wimbledon this year. Hold the line, Novak, we're all behind you.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this discussion that Carl and Luke Avery, /Lambda if you know him from YouTube, had about the wisdom of Ecclesiastes. And if you want to follow what else is coming out from Carl, you can follow him on Getter at @CarlBenjamin. Thank you and goodbye.